Russian President Vladimir Putin held a 90-minute phone call with US President Donald Trump. And as a result, it does look like the end may be in sight for this horrendous war that Russia has been waging for almost 3 years now. So that, it sounds like great news, but there are some details from Mr. Trump's statement about this phone call that make it sound like it could very well happen on terms that will not really bring any sort of lasting peace. And there are some statements suggesting that Mr. Trump is blind to Putin's real ambitions and his true nature. So this call took place on Wednesday, and President Trump posted about it on Truth Social that day. In one section of his post, he said, quote, "We want to stop the millions of deaths taking place in the war," end quote. So, I think everyone can agree that that sounds like a great idea. Although the number that he's using there, millions, isn't factually accurate, even if you go by the most hyperbolic estimates. But anyway, Mr. Trump continued from there saying that he would call the leadership of Ukraine to, quote, inform him of the negotiations. So clearly this deal that President Trump is working toward doesn't even pretend to factor in Ukrainian interests. Instead, Ukraine will be informed of what will happen. And some of Trump's officials have come out in the days since, and they've given more details about this. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said Ukraine won't regain the territory that Russia has violently seized. Russia can keep that. And he also said the US doesn't have any business trying to stop Putin's continued efforts to take more, and that it should just be left to someone else to do that if somebody else wants to try to stop Russia. So all of that, I think, is alarming to hear for those who understand even the most basic lessons that history teaches about what happens when aggressors are not stopped and when they are instead appeased and even rewarded for naked aggression and war crimes. This stance from the Trump administration, if it shapes up to be what it seems like it is shaping up to be at this point, then it's hard to see how that's not just a dangerous capitulation to Russia. And some of Trump's officials have even been asked if there's anything at all that Russia is expected to give up as part of these negotiations. So far, none of them have come up with an answer. So it's extremely good news for Russia if it shakes out the way it seems to be happening. But I think that the most worrisome part of the whole situation is probably President Trump's apparent view of Vladimir Putin, the man. Some of his other statements from this Truth Social post are, "I had a lengthy and highly productive phone call with Putin. We discussed Ukraine, the Middle East, energy, artificial intelligence, the power of the dollar, and various other subjects. Putin and I each talked about the great benefit that we will someday have in working together." Then skipping down, Mr. Trump says, "Putin and I agreed to work together very closely, including visiting each other's nations," end quote. So those are Trump's words about Vladimir Putin. And this kind of stance from Mr. Trump toward Putin is not new. Back in 2015, candidate Trump said, quote, "I think I would get along very well with Vladimir Putin," end quote. And Mr. Trump actually repeated that general sentiment numerous times throughout his campaign. And many people back in 2015 said, you know what, good for Trump. I'm glad he wants to get along with Putin. In the cold world of geopolitics, you have to respect Putin's interests and you have to get along with him. You have to kind of play ball with him. I even find myself sometimes having that kind of realpolitik kind of, some of those kinds of thoughts. But Trump editor-in-chief Gerald Flurry categorically condemned that kind of thinking.
Can Mr. Trump really get along well, very well, with Vladimir Putin when he has such disgusting and devastating policies that are just sick to the core and even satanic? Can we get along with him? Can God get along with the devil? We need to think about that, because this is the real world that we're talking about. Vladimir Putin has killed in far excess of 160,000 of his own people in Chechnya. Now, that would be somewhat like Washington, D.C. deciding they're going to kill 160,000 people in New York, for example, the state of New York. And Putin's conduct inside Russia, well, you also have to look at the more than 130 journalists that he has murdered since he has been president. And he has just taken total control over the media. He's just crushed any independent media. That would be like America murdering all the opposing journalists of the administration, and then just crushing anybody who in the media who opposes them. Now, this is something that is very serious, and we all need to think about it. Where is God? We get further and further away from God and closer to Vladimir Putin so he can prey upon us. And that's what he will do. That's all he knows to do. And he'll do it.
So those are very strong words, very clear words. And of course, it applies in 2025 every bit as much as it did back in 2017 when that was written.